Frère Jacques, smelly poo. Justin is a pussy, Bodi is a pussy, so are you. Happy New Year, gotta go.
You so freaking bad. Wrestle me.
Welcome, everybody, to the Juice Pro Wrestling Podcast, episode 138.
Blood, Sret, and beers.
If you notice something different this week, it's just me. I fired Bodi and I fired Justin. Now you just got me for the next 50-something minutes. We'll see how it goes. To start right off the bat and add a little more pressure to myself, if I say take a drink of whatever alcoholic beverage, or if you want to play dangerously for you lactose intolerant motherfuckers, drink some cottage or take a spoonful of cottage cheese and take a shot of milk every time I say What's the point of this episode? The point of this episode is for me to talk about how the show started. I lied. I didn't fire Justin and I didn't fire Bodi. I like those guys. Also, I'm lazy. I can't do this without them. I don't really know shit about wrestling. Oh, Lord, it's going to be fun. I'm glad y'all are listening. So I'm going to talk about the history of the podcast, how we started, how I met Bodi, how I met Justin, how we started the show. And then I'm going to answer some questions by two of my buddies. Those two buddies happen to be Wallace and Bodi. All right, man. History of the show. History of the show all started with my podcasting obsession. Who the fuck am I? If it's your first time listening to the show, my name is Sreten. I'm the producer / co-host / most visually impaired one of the group. So I'm obsessed with podcasts. My podcast obsession started because I had a talk radio obsession back in the 90s. We just had Kirby the voice from Freelance Wrestling and Warrior Wrestling. We just had him on the show 2 weeks ago, I think. And he talked about WGN Chicago radio. We're from the Chicagoland area. I'm in Indiana, but I'm a Chicago Bulls fan. Watch all the Chicago teams. Go to all the Chicago games. Chicago's only like 30-minute drive, like to get to the Loop downtown. So, anyways, for whatever reason, I, as a middle school kid, was obsessed with Ice-T because he was the best. And talk radio. I would do chores at my house outside with my Walkman and my headphones, and I had it tuned to AM radio. I was only 12-year-old doing that fucking bullshit. So, cut to years later, a grown man in my probably mid 30s, I don't know. I found out about podcasts. It was about 12 years ago or something. I got really, really into podcasts. And then I tried to do one 5 years after that. Cut to 3 years ago, I opened a bookstore with a buddy of mine. But it wasn't just a bookstore. That store was called Green Door Books and Studio. It's still open. It's in Hobart, Indiana. Google that shit. I think there's a Google site to see pictures and to write reviews. Only 5 stars. Anything less than that, you're an asshole. So I opened this bookstore and studio with a friend of mine. And the idea was he had experience with used books, which was a used bookstore. And I had an obsession with podcasts and limited experience with audio recording, but I wanted to create a studio. And the idea on the studio side of things, so I was in charge of the studio side of things. My buddy was in charge of the book side of things. And then combined, we tried to engage, it was mostly him, engage artists and develop relationships with local people, local artistic talent to try to sell their stuff in our store too. I'm not a part of that bookstore anymore. It's gonna be part of this story, but it's still open. It's the best bang for your buck if you're in Northwest Indiana. If you're driving through, stop at Green Door. It's a fantastic place to get a lot of books for really cheap and get some amazing art by a bunch of amazing artists locally and on occasion from other parts of the country. I don't know if I'm lying about that, but go walk in there and find out. So the way that the podcast stuff started, when we first opened the bookstore, there was a back room. The back room was the whole store is small, a small footprint. So with the bookstore in the front, little room in the back was supposed to be the studio. So that's where I started. No carpet, just books and dust and some shitty equipment that was good enough to get good sound. But I mean, it was a dark back room. We didn't even have like electricity back there because we blew a fuse when we first opened the store. We didn't have light in there. Anyways, my idea and my goal as a business was to develop a bunch of different podcasts by local different hosts, people that I would meet in the community, including myself. I wanted to have like 3 or 4 podcasts of my own because I had comedy ones and other things that I wanted to do too. And so that was the idea. Now we opened it. I was too big of a chicken to start my own show. So it was time for me to find other people. And there was a bar next door. I went over there to have a couple beers. I meet a guy. For the sake of respectful history and whatever, I'm going to say other people's names, but I'm not going to say his name. But I met this dude and I engaged him in a conversation at the bar. I told him he told me he was, thinking about doing podcasts. I was like, holy shit, this is serendipity. I have a recording space in the back. Come to the bookstore tomorrow and let's test it out. And within that week or something, we tried one. And right then and there, I had a music podcast on my network. So I wanted the goal was to I didn't finish my point. The goal was to cultivate all these voices and all these different people, because on the production side, I thought I was confident enough to have good audio and also to be able to nurture these people, including myself, to develop and have good shows and locally popular shows, but also the ultimate goal was to be nationally and internationally, globally popular. I wanted to make big ass shows in little ass Northwest Indiana. That was the goal. So had a music show. The dude that I met that we did the music show, he knew a shitload about music. So it was his show and he had a buddy that did the first test one and to feel it out. And then he, the next time we recorded, he brought a different friend, and this other friend's name, this guy named Vince, was obsessed with movies. So naturally with give and take of trying to figure out what to do, I had a music podcast and a movie podcast. And so the network had started. Bookstore was working. We, open every day, doing all the whole thing. When I had time, once a week, we would start recording. Now, one thing I'd like to say, if you're in the podcasting game, there's a lot of shit that people will tell you. But in my opinion, the number one thing is consistency. So if you decide you're going to put out some shit, you're not supposed to ever skip, which was an issue when I was recording, editing, posting 5 or 6 podcasts every week, because I was doing all that stuff. It burned me out because we rarely, if ever, skipped episodes. Once we started, that was the deal. Once you start, we don't stop until you want to quit the show, which everybody almost eventually did. But so I met the first dude, and then I met the other guy, and then the first dude introduced me to Wallace as a guest on his music podcast. So we're still in the back of the bookstore. It's still dingy. We're recording. I meet Wallace. I think it might have been months later. Like I said, during these stories, a lot of stuff is fuzzy because that was a stressful time. And I think the trauma part of my brain erased that shit. Not because of anybody. I was just under a lot of stress and pressure. Most of it was self-induced and most of it was sleep deprivation. A lot of work, no sleep. It's a bad combo. Also, I was putting a lot of fast food into my body, and that's a terrible combo. But so we had a music podcast. We had a movies podcast. One day, a lady came into the bookstore, and talked with my business partner. And she said she was an Amtrak train person. Like, she's one of those people that serves you sandwiches and 7-Ups and shit while you're going from Chicago to like Portland and different places. And she had a lot of good stories. And she said she wanted to write a book. My business partner was like, would you ever want to do a podcast? She said, what that is. And then sure enough, a couple weeks later, we had a Amtrak podcast. which is cool. I wanted to get, I like everything. I'm interested in everything. So this was exciting for me. So somewhere in that time, after Justin was on a guest on that music podcast, he decided that he wanted to do a wrestling one. Like we met, we talked, we were fine. We clicked. It was cool. Everything was cool, but we weren't like friends. It was just somebody I knew that was friends with the guy that I met originally that introduced me to these other people that ended up starting podcasts. So he's like, I want to do a wrestling one. I was like, sure. I was into wrestling back in the day. So he got excited and he's like, well, do you know this? And I just stared at him like he just punched up, my brand new puppy. I blank stare. The fuck are you talking about, bro? I don't know shit about this stuff. But it seemed interesting. Why not have a wrestling one? So we had Amtrak, music, movies, wrestling. Two buddies of mine, Brad and John, were obsessed, and ARPs continue to be obsessed with NFL football and fantasy football and sports in general, but they were really good at the fantasy football thing. So we did a fantasy football podcast with the two of them as a host. So, fantasy football, wrestling, Amtrak, music, movies. And I know I'm forgetting one or two, but I wanted to do some more. So I did a couple of test recordings. So that was within that first year that the bookstore was open. We were doing stuff, and we quickly, I think within the first 6 or 7 months, ran out of space in the back for the books for organization. So, a space opened up, a tiny 10 by 10 foot room opened up a few doors down in another building. It was available for me to rent. So I was like, hell yeah, why not? The only thing that it was lacking was internet, which wasn't an issue for the first year of the studio. And then we didn't have internet, but I rented the place out and I built a fucking studio. I built a legit studio. I built an area for me to stand originally and then sit for a while. And I think stand, I kept switching. I had it all set up, man. Anybody that was there saw how relaxing it was. I tried to make it as professional as possible, given our budget. We were slowly upgrading equipment. I think the last year that I was there, I invested a shitload in mics and mic stands and a badass mixer, which I didn't like. And then that's where we introduced the webcams and a bunch of other stuff. But at that time I had this thing and it was supposed to be a business model. And I tried twice already in the last 12 minutes to say what the goal of the business was, but it was to produce these voices and make money off of that shit. Make money off of each show, renting the space from me, renting my producer, like being a producer for these guys, and then just on products and anything we do around that stuff. There was a bunch of different revenue streams, but it turns out I'm a really bad businessman, so I didn't make shit. None of the shows were that popular. Not saying that they were bad, just that's just the nature of this fucking thing. I couldn't figure out the social media side of things. So everybody tried and it fucking failed. It failed. I mean, I don't want to say failed bad in my eyes because of money invested in time and blood, sweat, and tears and all that shit. Based on those criteria, that shit failed. Do I regret it? No, I don't. I learned a lot. I fucked up a lot, found out a bunch of stuff about my deficiencies as an organizer, as a person, as a salesman, as a time management guy, as an actual person trying to entertain people on the internet with my voice, which regretfully, I didn't really talk much in a lot of these things, which in the future, I hope I change that. I hope all the stuff that we didn't do in, Studio 2.0, we might do in the future with Studio 3.0. But what eventually happened was people had life stuff, people had health stuff. So they ended up quitting, not doing the show anymore. Also, there was an incredible amount of drama between people, whether that's true or not. That's my perception. That's the story I'm telling. And it ended up that there were only 2 podcasts left because I was incredibly burnt out. The music guy, for pretty much the last year, he was essentially doing that shit by himself. I had it also set up. A point of pride was I had that studio set up so almost all you had to do was walk in, press the buttons to record, and it was set up. And then you pressed to stop and you left, and I would do the rest when you were done, which is what I still did. I think during the last month or two, the music guy had a guy he found to do kind of that production stuff. So I didn't have to do any of that stuff either, like any of the editing stuff. But I was still doing the show with Justin. And what happened was through the bond that we created with the stress during that time, and him actually having like Justin actually had my back on a bunch of stuff. And this isn't like a fighting back thing. This is just like I'm fucking stressed, bro. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to pivot. I'm not making money doing this stuff. All this stuff is getting super hard. I'm sleep deprived. I'm unhealthy. I'm gonna fucking drop dead from this shit. People are fighting when they shouldn't. I don't want to, this is supposed to be fun, and it's rough. And he listened every time I fucking bitched about it. He had my back. Like, that's what I mean. Which was cool. It's a sign of friendship. We became friends through the stress of my being a failure of a businessman. So the studio was still open when All Out came to Chicago. This is after, like I said, we started the podcast. I think officially Juice Pro Wrestling was a thing. We had the studio as a space to work in when All In was announced, because that's one of our worst audio episodes. I think it was like episode 2 or something like that, because I forgot to turn on the mic. So all we recorded was us talking in the corner and the Young Bucks on a laptop or something. Like, it was really rough. So I decided that I couldn't do the bookstore thing anymore. It was getting to be too stressful. I wasn't good at any aspect of any of the businesses I was starting to do. As a last ditch effort, I tried to, start some other stuff and have some money coming in. And nothing worked, at least for me. So I had a conversation with my bookstore partner, and I told him I gotta get out of it. I can't do it anymore. I'm a pop. And he said, your health is fucking first, sweet guy. And then that was it. And then, and then that summer last summer, 2 summers ago, I had to figure it out, what I was going to do next. But I didn't want to quit doing podcasts, but specifically, I didn't want to quit Juice Pro Wrestling. I wanted to start some other ones, but I didn't have I just didn't have the energy, mentally or physically, really. But we went to All Out, and I decided that I'm going to record this podcast until the lease runs out in the studio, which was quarantine March of April 1st of 2020. We were done with our lease with the studio. So I was like, I'll give this shit a shot until then. And then we did, and then the quarantine started, and I decided no matter what, Justin and I were going to keep doing the show, whatever way it looks like, whoever's house we got to go to, however we have to do it, we'll fucking do it. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think when we had Sabu, man, I'm gonna get punched in the face for saying Sabu. When we had him as a guest on the phone, I think Ed Stoyancevich and Wallace and I came to my house and recorded in my dining room area. I think that was the podcast. And I think we didn't have the studio then, which is great as a told story when you don't know any of the details, but it's important because people want to know, how the fuck this thing started. Yeah. So March of 2020 was our last month with the studio, and that's when the quarantine started, and we started using Zoom, and here we are. It's almost March again, and we are doing this thing. So that is pretty much the journey of Juice Pro Wrestling. Any other details? I mean, I could get into more, but that's kind of the general thing. I think I've given it 18 minutes, and I hope it was sort of interesting. It was the thing I did learn that I was grateful for was during all that incredible stress and incredible hopefulness at the time when we started all that stuff in that first year and a half. If you were to talk to me, I was fucking annoying. I had dreams of like buying helicopters and shit. And I really wanted to do some big stuff. And, nothing was working. I had a shitload of fun nights and fun times. Maybe a little bit too much drinking. But but I had a lot of really good conversations with everybody that was involved. Unfortunately, there was also a lot of stress, but in hindsight, I don't blame anybody or any of the personalities or any of the people that came in and out of the studio. The bookstore experience was nice. It was fine. It just, again, I was bad at the business side of things. And if, I was able to get out of it, so I did. It's still open. I think I might have mentioned at the beginning. So if you're, again, if you're driving through Hobart, Indiana, or you want to look them up, Green Door Books, they're still open. They're help them out. It's quarantine times. Every penny and dollar helps. And that place is, you get a bang for your buck, man. I might have already said that, but back to the podcast thing. So I had such a good time with Wallace, and I saw that there was potential and evolution, and he's got such a good voice and a knowledge of wrestling, and he's entertaining as fuck, and he's got high energy. So I wanted to keep doing it every week, whether I was stressed or not. We turn on the mics, and I had a nice time. And there were maybe 3 times in all of our recordings. I think the last time was maybe 6 weeks ago, where I was like a real fucking baby. And I don't know if you could tell on occasion. I don't want people to assume things, because usually, whether I'm quiet or not, which I'm mostly quiet, I'm having a really good time. I'm entertained. I really, really like talk radio and talking formats, long form conversations in just about any subject. If you look at my phone and what podcasts I listen to, you would ask me, is there anything wrong with you? You must have attention deficit disorder, ADHD, every combo of that stuff, because I like a lot of stuff. I have a lot of interests. It's good and it's bad. But in the end, when we closed the studio and we did everything, the last man standing was Juice Pro Wrestling Podcast. And we've had a good time, and we continue to have a good time. And I'm grateful for those guys. I'm grateful for Bodi, and I'm grateful for Justin. And I think that's about as much of the history as I need to share about that. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and find me on the internet and send me a message. I'll answer anything. We're nice guys. I always wonder what the perception is of us outside of these things. I don't know if there's gossip or wrestling. Like, the wrestling community is as supportive and wonderful and open-minded and protective as it is. There's also a bunch of fucking babies, and that's how it is. And I don't know who thinks we're dicks and who thinks we're cool. I have no idea. We only try to be respectful to everyone we come into contact with, whether on the internet and real life. I prefer real life. So I'm going to look at some of the points, because I wanted to knock out the history of how we started. How I met Justin was, through the music guy, through the podcast. And then we just slowly developed this friendship that got solidified at a Warrior show in tandem with All Out Weekend. Like, All Out Weekend, Justin and I went to my brother's place in Chicago. My brother has a place in Chicago, an apartment, and we stayed there while we went to all the wrestling shows. And I just had a really good time. It was just fun. A bunch of different promotions, and everybody was cool. And then we got to go to AEW's, one of their big promotions, or big events. And it was cool hanging out in the parking lot and meeting other people. And I think Warrior, I didn't say how I met Bodi. It was a combination of Warrior Wrestling. I met Bodi and All Out Saturday. He met us at Maxwood Grill, and we recorded an episode there. And then we had like a box seating at the show too. And it was fun, man. He's fun. That's where we connected. And we officially, a few months after that, last December, it was right around Christmas time, he was working at Racine Brewery in Racine, Wisconsin. He isn't now, because I think the brewery is temporarily closed, but he talked to the owners, and he let us, like the three of us, recorded an episode up there. And that was where I was officially like, all right, Bodi's the third guy. Like, we got to get him on as often as possible, because he knows just as much about music as Wallace and about wrestling as Wallace. And he used to wrestle, and he loves this wrestling shit as much as Wallace does. And I'm learning to love it. I'm real nonchalant about this shit, because I really am as much as we talk about this, as much as time in my week is spent every week, I'm still the casual guy. Names don't stick as easily as they stick with those two guys. They're way the fuck more passionate about this shit. I don't think I'd be able to do any of, if not all of the interviews that those guys do, because I don't know what to ask. And I would, I'd be like, what kind of ice cream do you like? Ric Flair, instead of asking about Ric Flair, like a legit shit, I'd be asking dumb shit. Like, have you seen the Queen's Gambit? And did you like it? And he'd be like, who the fuck is this guy? So my wrestling fandom, that is part 2 of this 3-part horseshit by me, Sreten. My wrestling fandom. It started with WWF. When I was a kid, everything was WWF. I don't know how old I was. It was in the 80s. I don't have a lot of recollection of the intensity of my fandom. I know when Ultimate Warrior ran out, if we were watching, we were running out too. We didn't watch main events. We watched whatever was there on Saturdays. So whatever came out, I remember listening to Mean Gene talk real fast all the time. I remember Bobby the Brain being a weasel and just loving watching him get his ass kicked. But it was something I really liked back then. But unless something carries over into your adulthood with that same obsession, you have pleasant memories of that shit, of being a kid and liking this thing, but you don't have those, like, I don't remember detail because I wasn't obsessed with it my whole life. It was like when I was like 9 or 11 or something. I don't know. But cut to whatever year American Gladiators first came out, at the same time Glow Wrestling was on. At least that's how I remember that shit. And Glow was only on for like 2 seasons, I think. But my youngest brother was obsessed with it. He was like 5 and he was obsessed with Glow. So that was our family thing. We'd watch American Gladiators on Saturdays and then we watch Glow or whatever combo they were on. I don't know which one's on first or second. So I'm hoping in the future we have some of the people from Glow, some of the wrestlers and performers on the show. That's one of our goals. And I'd like to actually have I don't think my brother remembers any of those people either, any of those girls, women. But it'd be cool to interview them. Like, it'd be super cool. So that was in maybe at the latest, the 90s. It might have been 88 or 89. Shit, I don't know. He might have been 3 or 4. And then cut to my real fandom was 1997, 98. Only lasted less than 2 years. And that was with the NWO. I was crazy about the NWO and wrestling at that time. I didn't watch any WWE, any WWF. It was all the other promotion. It was all that stuff. And I had a, Diamond Dallas Page. I dressed as Sting for 2 Halloweens in a row. I was, it wasn't even that I was like super crazy about Sting. I just love how he looked. I loved the NWO. I loved Hulk Hogan's heel turn and just how evil they were. It was fun. That was the time where I was in 97, 98, I was a sophomore in college, and I had a roommate that was a legit like a wrestler, like a high school like state champ, I think, or close to it, wrestler. And I would try to attack him, and we do pro wrestling shit to each other in the living room and break lamps and fuck up furniture, and it was so much fun. So after that, like after I think 98, whatever, at some point I didn't give a shit until I met Wallace. And he started talking about the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, and I didn't know what in the fuck he was talking about. But I used to like wrestling, and he said this is a very special time. And this is after him going through watching Ring of Honor his whole life, WWE his whole life, and New Japan his whole life, and NWA his whole life, and TNA, and just like everything. WCW. God, I had a brain fart. I couldn't remember WCW. I kept saying NWO. He would watch all of that shit. And so I met him, and he talked about what the Young Bucks were doing, what's going on, and he kept giving me this information, and he painted this picture of such amazing interest. The only thing that he didn't talk about that much was the indie scene, the independent wrestling scene, because I actually don't know why, because it was a lot of local stuff, and it's sort of, I don't know. It's kind of amazing now. COVID kind of fucked that shit up. I don't know. I think it's you know, a lot of these promotions, at least locally in Chicago, which Justin likes to say is the mecca for wrestling, and it kind of is. There's all these amazing wrestling promotions, but you know, some of them are older than 3 or 4 years, but I don't think any of them are older than 5. You know, I could be wrong. If you're listening and you have issues with any of the facts that I'm saying, send me a message, babies. I don't mind. Educate me. I don't mind. But we didn't talk that much about independent wrestling because it wasn't as it just wasn't as awesome. I that's my opinion. He didn't say anything like that. But through us starting the podcast and meeting people, we started going to these shows. And you know, when I said I met Wallace and it sort of started to reignite my wrestling fandom, what solidified it. So when they say, when you're studying, like if you're trying to learn some shit, like if you're in college or high school or whatever, any time, even if you're trying to learn cursive, which they don't teach anymore, they say you read the material one day and then within an 8-hour period the next day. So let's say you study till 9 p.m. The next morning, revisit that shit and it will stick. It will stick in your brain. That knowledge will stick. You want it to further stick, the next day do the same shit. So within 3 days, you'll learn that stuff pretty solidly, almost memorize anything. That's kind of how my wrestling fandom started. I went to a Warrior Wrestling show. I hurt my foot stomping. I lost my voice screaming. I had a hell of a time. I met wrestlers like Brian Cage that I didn't know who they were. They were cool. And then I watched them perform and I was like, holy shit. And then it turns out that I met like a handful of people that are like awesome right now, that are known, at least in the wrestling world. I think in 2 years, AEW and a lot of these indie wrestlers are going to be as well known as a lot of the WWE wrestlers. They currently are not. At least that's my perception. So anyways, went to a Warrior show. It was cool. I was like, oh man, I got a lot more to learn. There's a lot more shows I want to go to. I hope Warrior keeps doing this stuff. I wasn't aware of freelance. I wasn't aware of any of these. I wasn't aware of GCW. I wasn't aware of any of these other promotions. Then a few months after that, we went to All Out and had that whole weekend. And I saw like 5 different promotions do all this shit. And I was like, I'm hooked. That was like that 8-hour period when you're done studying, you're trying to learn math. Suddenly I knew math and I liked the math and it was cool. Other than at the GCW show, somebody got hit with a light tube and almost cut the artery in their arm here. So I didn't want to be a witness to a man dying because I wanted to be entertained while eating a pretzel and drinking a shitty warm old style. So that's why I'm not a fan of the GCW stuff. But that show that I went to was pretty fucking fun. Again, minus the blood. It's too much. I've already made my opinions known about like deathmatch wrestling. I on occasion I like to watch it, but to watch whole shows where there's just where they go through 300 light tubes, I have zero interest in that shit. It's not entertaining to me. So that wasn't my point. My point was, how did I get really, really into wrestling? So my third day in my weird analogy with the studying shit is months later, last November, December, during a period of like 3 months, I went to 3 freelance shows and I went to the third one by myself, and Tom, the lighting guy, let me help him set stuff up. And I don't know how big of a help I was. I kind of just followed the people that were setting up around and watched them set up the ring, and they were super welcoming. And then I got to stand up above where all the wrestlers and the lighting guys hang out, like while the show was starting. And that's when I was officially hooked. But the other 2 times I went with a buddy of mine that lived nearby. And it was just great. Like the atmosphere and everything about the freelance shows was super welcoming and super fun. And everybody was cool. The people that knew me, the people that didn't know me, like nobody really knew me. The 2 heels and a face guys, I don't know how the hell, like, I don't know if I said hi or they said hi, but, them and then Val and then a bunch of the wrestlers, which shook my hand, but they didn't know who I was. They just did that with everybody. And I was like, wow, this is cool. It's very easy to get on my good side. Just smile and be nice to me. That's all I need. Even if you're, that's it. Just smile and be nice to me. It's all I need. So that solidified my wrestling fandom was fucking going to my first Warrior show and then going to All Out Weekend and then going to those freelance shows. And then after that, I was all in. So that's the second part of this 3-part thing. Now, I hope that you're being entertained by all this cock-a-doo-doo. I'm going to go into the third part, which is the questions. Now, Bodi and Wallace sent me some questions and said, answer this shit, you big dummy. I think Wallace said, you stupid fucking asshole. That piece of shit. I'll get him one of these days. All dead fuck it. So I'm going to start with Wallace's question first. He asks, what have you learned about wrestling today compared to back when you watched? So I assume that means back when I watched WWE as a kid. So when I watched WWE as a kid, I was a kid. So everything was real to me, like everything, every cartoon, everything, but wrestling especially, because everything was secret. Everything about wrestling was secret. The bad guys were not friends with the good guys. Mean Gene was the authority. The announcers were the authority. So you watch this thing play out, and I was all in, and I didn't know any of that stuff. I knew names of some of the finishing moves, and I knew the wrestlers' names, and I liked watching the lunacy of their promos. Like, all those dudes seemed super coked out. I didn't know what the fuck cocaine was. I was 9 years old. I'm not that cool. Yeah, so back when I was a kid, wrestling was 100% real. Now, as an adult, now watching it as a 42-year-old man and getting back into wrestling, I see it as super fun theater. And what have I learned? I know 90% of the shit that is involved in creating a match, an event, the people involved, the moves, the terms, the secret terms, which also, like 10 years ago or something, the curtain was pulled back and you kind of know everything anyways. And then within the last 5 years, more and more old time wrestlers told their stories. And so now there aren't almost any secrets. And some fans get pissed that they don't know even more. Like they almost want to, like, that's another topic. I answered the question. I'm going to fucking move on. Bodi asks, how long have you done audio video editing and how did I learn? So the video editing, I'm still learning. I don't know much about my to have good cameras, to have good video is very expensive. So we have very basic, where I found the best webcam for cheap. The next upgrade is hundreds of dollars. So we have what we have. And on the editing side of things, I use DaVinci Resolve. It's a program, it's free. And I use that to edit our videos. Now, video editing it's minimal stuff, and I'm learning. And how did I learn any of this stuff? Was just obsession. The audio side of things is my main concern. I always fought with everybody during the studio times, and not anymore. Not anymore. Now I'm okay with doing YouTube. I want to do other YouTube shows. But back then, everybody in the studio was like, we need YouTube, we need video. I was like, no, it's a whole other animal that I can't afford, and it's not part of what I love. I do want to make movies. I want to make films and TV shows and all that shit, YouTube shows. But in my initial iteration of the studio and what I wanted to create with the network that I had and tried to create was audio only. And so where my obsession started with that stuff was, I always liked sound. I always liked sound mixing. I always liked the idea of these talk shows and their setups and how to audio edit. And even when I was like a 7 or 8 year old kid, I used to do these. I had a little like boombox, and a buddy of mine would make these little skits. I think it was called like Joey and Bobby, and we would just, we would like pretend that I beat the hell out of him, and we'd race car drivers, and it was just silly shit that like kids did. I'm sure a lot of kids did it, but I guess that my obsession started then. But when I fully got invested in podcasts, my timeline is off, but I want to say it was about 2006-07. I started listening to a few comedy podcasts and a couple political ones. I didn't get super heavy in the political shit just yet. That was a couple years after that. But 2 podcasts. So I reached out to a bunch of different podcasts that I kind of enjoyed, but the two that I was particularly obsessed with, one was called Vomitus Prime. Dudes out of Iowa, I think, or yes, let's say, never mind. Who cares where they were from? But they were super funny, super private. but they always would give out their email. And I reached out to the guy that did all the sound stuff, and he gave me like all the details about what mics they use, what's cheap, what's this, what's that. That's where I learned like what mixer to get, what mics to get. The way I learned how to put it on the internet was another a friend of mine turned me on to a tech podcaster named Tom Merritt, and he had content online about where to host this stuff. So if you want to host audio for free, you go to archive.org. It's free. There's certain restrictions with it, but so is with everything else. So the combination of those two people helped me learn on the tech side, and it was just practice. I recorded up. I did a podcast with a buddy of mine years ago, and we did like 30 episodes or 32 within the span of 2 or 3 years, and then we quit. And I always want to relaunch that shit. I've tried like 3 or 4 times, but again, the consistency is everything. You're not going to ever have an audience if you're not consistent at all, because nobody's going to give a shit, except for because I named 2 podcasts that I was really a huge fan of. That second podcast, first one I said was Vomitus Prime. The second one is a podcast that's still, you could still find their stuff online, but they are, 3 years ago, they were really consistent, or maybe 5, but they're OGs. They started podcasting before I think podcast was a word, which, let's make it clear, I hate the word podcast. I think it's stupid. Now that some people are trying to cut it short and like say, "Oh, are you listening to this pod?" I wish, like, if you notice on a lot of stuff and there's descriptions that we use, if you don't see the word podcast, if you just see Juice Pro Wrestling, it's because I literally don't like the word podcast. I don't want to call it that. That's what everybody calls it. That's what they are. That's what they're known to be. But I think it's a stupid name. So that second podcast, it was a podcast called PNS Explosion. There's 3 gay dudes from Chicago that just talk shit for as long as they want, sometimes 45 minutes, sometimes 3 hours. And I found them through searching like comedy podcasts on the iTunes search engine shit for podcasts. And I found them and I listened, and I thought they were super funny. They still are. They didn't stop being funny. They just don't do their stuff that consistently, but they have they're so awesome that I get excited anytime they put one out. I think the last time they put one out was like last year or something. But like I said, I was a fan, and so I reached out to them too, and they couldn't give me that much information on the tech side of thing, but they were super friendly. So I became friends with them, and I'm still friends with them. I mean, I haven't seen either one of those guys in probably a couple of years, but and by friends, I mean real casual friends. Like I'm not good at that stuff, I guess, or I'm a shitty friend, but we've been to dinner a handful of times. And that's it. And I'm grateful. Those guys are super cool. Like if you have a chance, check them out. PNS Explosion. They're really funny. But through my experiences and listening to all these things, I kept testing it and recording and testing. And that's how I learned. And then I got confident enough that when I had the idea to do the studio, which was actually not my idea, my business partner, his name is Michael. He's no longer my business partner, but his name is still Michael. He had the idea. He's like, "Why don't we open a used bookstore and you can and a podcasting studio? Like, you could do your podcast." And I was like, "Shit, I do want to do that." So we tried it, and that was that. But that's how I learned. I was confident enough that I tried it, and then through recording over the next, since we started 3 years ago with the podcast, little by little, I learned all these different things. So I've never. Like if a actual audio engineer came up and asked me to like some terms or to do some shit, I would stare blankly, then deuce in my pants. So I would have an excuse to be like, "I got to get out of here. I just shit in my pants." And I would not answer his questions because I don't know the technical terms. Like I know what gain is. I know some stuff, but if you tell me to turn this and this in this way, I'm going to shake my fist at you, and I might, and then I might run. So I think I answered that question, Bodi. All right. Wallace says, who's your favorite wrestlers then and now? So then it was definitely, I already said they're not wrestlers, but Bobby the Brain Heenan and Mean were the shit. They were the base, for me, but it was always Hogan and Macho Man. There were other guys, but it was always Hogan and Macho Man, always, forever, whatever. I mean, I didn't watch NWA, and I don't know if WCW was around when I was a kid. But like for some reason, somebody like Ric Flair, I hated Ric Flair forever. Even in college, I had a roommate of mine that was a huge Ric Flair fan, and if I didn't have my head up my ass, I would have been a Ric Flair fan too. But I wasn't. I didn't like him. I don't know why. He was awesome. I was just a giant Hogan fan. So, but now it's hard to say who I'm a fan of now. There's I watch a lot of AEW. I watch whatever AEW puts out. So I've become a big Kenny Omega fan. I didn't know who he was until I started watching Dynamite. And I've become a huge Joey Janela fan because he's an amazing performer and he has amazing matches with everybody. But like I'm also like it's hard to say. I don't want to be insulting. I like with Impact. I like Ethan Page a lot because I think he's got a fantastic wrestler brain and he's got a brain for entertainment. And I don't think he's shown all of his physical capabilities because he doesn't need to. And there's a ton of people, a ton of awesome wrestlers. If I go to a show like an actual live show, man, I almost like everybody. Like there's almost nobody I don't like. And if I don't like somebody that does something, I kind of keep my mouth shut. There's some, I like the Rascals a lot too. I think my head almost exploded when I saw, oh gosh, what's his name now? Raspberries. Will Ospreay. When I saw him, I like my head almost exploded. I didn't know a human could do that stuff. And he was doing that stuff like 30 feet away from me. Let me list let's just list those guys because I don't know who else to list. There's some I like Thunder Rosa a lot. I think she's awesome. There's just across the board, there's a ton of fantastic wrestlers. And another thing that hooks me is when I go to a show to be able to shake some of these wrestlers' hands and have conversations. Like a really good memory was playing basketball with some of the guys, like a pickup game before a Warrior show. At the last Warrior show I went to, Brian Pillman was playing with us. I don't want to name anybody else because I honestly can't remember his name, even though he was a really cool dude. I don't know. He's one of the guys that might have gotten canceled with the Me Too stuff. I don't know if he deserved it or not. I don't know. It's not for me to say. If I knew more details, I'd give my opinion, but who gives a shit? But it was a good memory because I got to play basketball with those guys. I'm some fat dude struggling across the court. And, but it turns out they were all really bad at basketball. So my average playing ass was like, okay against them. So I don't know if I answered that, Wallace, but I think I did. Bodi said, what match or wrestler got you into wrestling? That's hard to say. I got like NWO during the NWO time. I liked the music. I don't know. I got into it. And then when I first got into it during WWF times, it was just that was the shit you watched on Saturdays. Everybody watched it. Hogan was the shit. Macho Man was a psycho and he was the shit. And that's what you watched. It wasn't a particular match. I don't really remember any matches. I remember when Hogan body slammed Andre the Giant. That was because everybody talked about that. It was a big deal. It was like a mainstream big deal. So I think I answered that. Wallace asks, did you ever... Oh, shit. I'll answer Bodi's question first because I really like that question that Wallace asked. So Bodi asks, what's your favorite JPDUB episode and favorite guest? So I can't answer that. There have only been maybe 2 people that we've had on the show that I didn't like. And I don't, when I have a bad time, I don't really dwell on it. So if something sucks, I kind of forget it pretty fast because I don't need to remember it, especially if it's traumatic. I remember traumatic shit in my life, but if it's like an episode of Juice Pro Wrestling, we're trying to be better. We're trying to be better, do better, entertain. We're trying to do stuff. So if we had a bad time, I'm just trying to learn from it. I don't want to remember it. So like I said, there were maybe 1 or 2 people, and there's only one guy that I can remember right now specifically that was a douchebag. That was in the early times, so we don't even need to mention him. He's just a big douchebag. And then I don't want to say, because I don't want to bust anybody out, but there have been a few times where we had a guest and it was like a phone guest, and that person obviously doesn't know who the fuck we are. We're podcasters. Like, most of us are not known by anybody, even the big podcasters. Fuck, I don't think a lot of people know who Joe Rogan is. That's the nature of this thing. Just like anything else, movies, whatever. And my mind gets blown when somebody says they haven't watched some movie that everybody on earth has watched. Like, I don't know, the Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or some shit. Or even like when somebody says I never saw Forrest Gump, I'm like, what planet are you on, man? But that's the nature of this shit. Not everybody can know everything. You can't expect that stuff. But there were a couple of wrestlers that did interviews with us that were like phone interviews. They were obvious, like they just knocked out like 10 or 12 or did a couple other ones or just they were just going through the motions. And they weren't bad guests. They weren't assholes. I wish I could revisit those or re-interview those people and come at them from a different angle, because one of the things that I think Wallace is really good at is he's a really, really good interviewer. He builds rapport with people very quickly. And in this recording thing, like I tell people all the time, whether it's a rule or not, usually it takes most people 15 to 20 minutes that don't know you to warm up to you if you're a pretty good interviewer. And I think Wallace is like an excellent, like, interviewer. He people seem to like him. Seem to. Everybody does except for me and Bodi. So favorite guest though. I have a good time almost every week. Like sometimes I'm moody. So, and I hope that doesn't show on camera. There's inevitable it does. If I'm not talking, that doesn't mean I'm not in a bad mood. I just like, there's no reason for me to talk most of the time. All I would do is fuck up the flow and, not add stuff. I would make a point. I'm bad with names. So and in the wrestling world, if you're having an interview, names are an important thing to remember. Like you need to remember everybody's fucking name, and you need to remember events. You need to remember, we just did an interview with, oh God, I'm going to fuck up. Sorry, I'm recording this late. Hardest Part of the Ring. And I came in and I couldn't remember anything. So I was just trying to burp out these facts or burp out like jokes. And I felt so bad. I couldn't contribute at all, to like the dude has got a very informative podcast, and Justin can blurt out most of those facts and events and wrestlers. And he can go pretty deep. That's what she said. I can't. Like I said, I'm the casual fan that likes doing this stuff with Bodi and Wallace. So what's my favorite episode? They're all pretty good. There's times we've recorded a JPDUB or a Juice Pro Wrestling episode, and I'm like, fuck, we get done and we're like, we end it with the guest or end it with ourselves, and we're all smiles because we just had a really nice time. That being said, I'm always looking to improve. So I'm the harshest critic of the three of us. So before I answer Wallace's question, I do want to, if I didn't mention it, so I might be repetitive, but I want to talk about how we got Bodi on the show. And so I said I met Bodi at a Warrior Wrestling show and then got to know him a little better during All Out Weekend. But after All Out Weekend and after we recorded at Racine, Wallace and I had conversations. Like we wanted to have him on the show more often, and he was on board. We were texting with each other a month or two into quarantine stuff, and he was on the show occasionally. We kind of just made it official that it made sense because of just all his knowledge, and like he wanted to entertain. He wanted to be a part of an entertaining. He wanted to be part of an entertaining show. We clicked with Bodi. Bodi clicked with Justin. They were already friends. And I don't know. We never had an official time, but I guess I would say maybe around August or September, he started doing the show with us every week, which is interesting and sometimes logistically difficult in a way. It would have been difficult if we had the studio because we didn't have internet there. Everything was live, even with the guests. But since quarantine happened, one of the things that we are grateful for is that we have been able to get a lot of really good guests on Zoom. We've also been able to, Wallace and I live a half hour away from each other, and Bodi lives in another state. Like we're in Indiana. He's in Wisconsin. And so he's a fucking 2.5 hour drive from us. And he's able to be our co-host, which is awesome because we are able to throw shit. I mean, if we weren't able to do this, there would never be a Three Vinces. And it's one of my favorite things that we do. So I guess that was just like a minute or two to talk about how Bodi got on the show too. It's just, we were open-minded about meeting a bunch of people, and he just happened to be a guy that we clicked with, and that wanted to be part of a podcast. And, and then we asked him, and we've been figuring it out, and it's been cool. And now it's like, to have a 3-person team is been awesome. Like, it's been great. And the shit we plan on doing in the future is going to be even more awesome, because I feel like I got 2 badass teammates, and it's cool. So we'll see where it goes from there. Last question from Wallace. Did you ever think you'd be producing the most entertaining wrestling podcast on the planet? No, I didn't. I knew we would be cool, but there's no bullshit when I say that I think we are the best wrestling podcast. I just think we're entertaining. We got a little bit of everything, positivity. I'm not a big fan of, we do it on occasion too, but I always get real pissy about it when we do fight cards, like fight card breakdowns, especially if we do like fight card breakdowns before an event and then fight card breakdowns after an event. I think it's boring, and maybe that's the casual guy saying it's boring, but it's fucking boring to me. But allow me to toot our horn, because I think we are the most positive. I like when we do criticize, which I criticize wrestling the most of the 3 of us. I think that Wallace and Bodi are incredibly knowledgeable about the majority of promotions. You know, the internet knowledge and nerddom about that stuff is pretty intense. And they will jump on your ass if you make a mistake, or you need to be, everybody wants to correct everybody on Twitter. And we don't need a lot of correcting. I do, they don't. I think we're funny. I think we could be funnier for sure, but I think we're funny. I think for the most part, we're polite, and I'm proud of that shit. So all in all, if I would list everything, I do think we're the most entertaining pro wrestling podcast on the planet. Shout out to all you people globally that listen to us. Thanks. So in conclusion, thanks for listening. Remember to follow us on all the podcasting platforms. If you are, for some reason, haven't subscribed to us, and you're watching and listening on YouTube, do that. Subscribe. If you're listening on any podcasting platform, subscribe to that shit. We're only going to get more and more entertaining. So the last things I want to say is, so I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to say happy holidays. But first, I would like to say, in the new year, right now we have Juice Pro Wrestling podcast, and we have the JPDUB podcast. Now we're doing the JPDUB podcast super inconsistently, because that's really like, it's not about wrestling. It's about whatever pop culture person we want to talk with and have a conversation with. And so we mix it in, and branding wise, we've created a little bit of confusion, but it's not that hard to figure out. It's just the second podcast that we wanted to give a different name. So if you see the JPDUB, you know we're probably not going to talk about wrestling. That's really it. And because Wallace and Bodi are so into music and death metal and that part of metal, I probably not saying the right subgenre. It's usually a music one, and it's usually a metal guy, or person, I should say. Shout out to Claire, who's been one of the, again, she's actually one of my favorite guests. She was super cool, and she's been super cool. Almost every one of the JPDUB guests has been some of my favorite people that we've had conversations with. I say almost, that sounds insulting. I don't mean that. But in 2021, look forward to more JPDUB episodes. Look forward to some other podcasts that we might do. And we might end up launching a second network, or just start cross promoting with other people that we're doing things with. And then I'm hoping in the new year to get some of our fellow wrestling podcasters on the show. It'd be nice. I'm trying to coordinate with the Get Cho guys and Two Heels and a Face to get them on the show. It's logistically, it's hard. everybody's got families, everybody's doing quarantine stuff, and everyone's busy, and that's how it goes. But yeah, if I were to recommend some wrestling podcasts, I just said those two. So the Get Show guys and Two Heels in a Face. I like those guys. I've met all of them. I met the Get Show guys once. They were super cool. And Two Heels in a Face guys multiple times, and they're also super cool. And yeah, thank you to those guys. And thank you to everybody else for the support. So this is the thank you part. I got like 1 minute left. Thank you to everybody that's supported us in the last year. Thank you for anybody that's told other people about our show. Keep listening. And then I just want to say one last thing. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Happy Hanukkah. Happy whatever you celebrate. If you don't celebrate everything and you're just sitting in a room by yourself, I hope for your sanity. I hope you stay sane as long as possible, sitting in your room by yourself. I hope for nothing but health and happiness to you and yours and your family and everybody around you and the people you care about and your friends. It's been really fun to do this thing. Happy New Year. I hope that you have an amazing 2021, and I hope our show is part of your 2021. Spread the word, man. I'm done talking, and I'm going to say wet them up in the most monotone voice that I can. Wet them up, wet them up, wet them up, wet them up.
You gonna do sex to me?
Did you like that video? If so, be sure to hit like and subscribe and check out more killer content from your boys at Juice Pro Wrestling. Whoa, yeah!